Could you please give us your name?
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
It's August 2019. For the first time, dozens of women feel that they might finally see justice. That's because their abuser, Jeffrey Epstein, has finally been arrested, and this time, he's not expected to be released on bail right away. It looks as though he might finally end up behind bars for a long time. Many of the women who were abused by Epstein feel emboldened by the arrest, especially those who have not yet testified. But no matter what hopes these women may have, Epstein apparently has a different plan. He has managed to evade justice before. Even though things look worse for him this time, he clearly has no intention of surrendering to his fate in the summer of 2019. He will find a way to evade justice once again, whatever the cost. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein is being held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. During his last stay, he had an entire wing to himself. Now, he has to share a single cell. Furthermore, the MCC isn't known for being in top condition. There are pests, and the sanitary facilities leave much to be desired. The same goes for Epstein's toilet, which he regularly complains about, just as he does about his uniform and the noise. Later, a note is found. "A prison guard locked me in the showers for an hour. Noelle sent me burnt food. Huge bugs are crawling all over my hands." No fun. Unlike before, his wealth isn't helping him this time. On July 23, 2019, he allegedly attempted to take his own life. That's where we left off in episode 5. Since the staff still doesn't see Epstein as an immediate danger to himself, he continues to share his cell with Nicholas Tartaglione. He's back to the normal prison routine, which he's struggling with. He has trouble sleeping and can't cope with prison life. He calls himself a coward in front of a guard. Epstein is also said to have deposited money into at least 3 of his fellow inmates' prison accounts in recent days. Presumably a well-known tactic for buying friendships behind bars. Even though Epstein is neither being released on parole this time nor placed in solitary confinement, he still has a little trick up his sleeve to circumvent the conditions of his incarceration. To escape the loneliness of his cell, Epstein simply meets with lawyers almost every day. For appointments with his defense attorneys, he is allowed to use the private meeting room in the wing. As a result, several people claim to have observed Epstein and his lawyers sitting together in this meeting room for up to 12 hours a day without really discussing much. On August 8, 2019, Epstein is again sitting in the meeting room with 2 of his lawyers. It will be their last meeting. On this day, 66-year-old Epstein is making changes to his will. It is not known whether prison authorities are aware of this. In any case, Epstein makes several amendments to his will. Epstein stipulates that his entire estate be transferred to a trust named after his year of birth, the 1953 trust. The advantage of such a trust is that transactions conducted through it are generally required to be kept confidential. The document specifies that should the 1953 trust be found to be unlawful, the estate is to be distributed among the trustees. In total, Epstein's assets are valued at $577 million in this final document. This includes everything, not just what's sitting in his bank account or safe, but also various real estate properties in the US and abroad, his private island, and various hedge funds and private equity investments. Epstein's tax advisor, Richard Kahn, and one of his attorneys, Darren Indyke, are responsible for managing the trust fund. At first glance, it might seem a bit strange to entrust the management to a lawyer and his tax advisor, rather than, for example, his brother or his then-partner. But in the context of Epstein, this decision makes perfect sense. A look at various business records reveals that both Kahn and Indike had previously been involved in the management of several of Epstein's companies. Among them are some that were later alleged in court documents to have existed solely for the purpose of his human trafficking operations. We'll take a brief leap forward in time here to understand the system. According to corporate records, Richard Kahn was the managing director of a New York-based design firm in the 2000s. Documents later filed in court allege that this very company was part of a network of firms that Epstein used to funnel money to his victims and to the person who recruited women for his abuse. For example, while tax advisor Kahn was the managing director of this shadowy design firm, the legal owner of the company is said to have been a woman who was abused by Epstein and paid through that very same firm. Consistent with this, an account belonging to the design firm was funded exclusively through private wire transfers from Epstein. According to court documents, Kahn and Indike are also alleged to have used another Epstein company registered in the Virgin Islands to issue various checks totaling $300,000. Some of these checks went to young women and others to an immigration attorney who allegedly ensured that alleged victims of human trafficking could remain in the United States. Nevertheless, both Richard Kahn and Darren Indike have consistently denied any wrongdoing in their dealings with Epstein and were never criminally charged. Both are said to have been ordinary employees performing ordinary work. Even though, according to records, between 2011 and 2019, they received a rather unusual total salary of $10 million and $16 million, respectively, from Epstein and his companies. On August 8, 2019, Epstein therefore made arrangements for these two men to have control over his estate in the event of his death. That event would occur in less than 48 hours. August 9th is a momentous day in the Jeffrey Epstein case. On this day, more than 2,000 pages of documents are released. Today, 7 years later, that number has risen to more than 3 million. However, on August 9th, 2019, this was not yet foreseeable. On this day, documents were released related to the case brought by Epstein's accuser, Virginia Giuffre, against his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, which began in 2015. Many of the statements made by Virginia and other witnesses during the proceedings were made public for the first time on this day. Unfortunately, we have now inevitably reached a point where things are getting a bit confusing. There are now countless conspiracy theories surrounding Epstein's death. This was also made possible by the way the investigative authorities handled the events of the last day of Jeffrey Epstein's life. Details were omitted, some were later revised, and many important pieces of the puzzle were only provided years later. That's why we'll have a slightly longer digression here, but it's important for context. First thing in the morning on August 9th, 2019, something happened that wasn't actually supposed to happen. As an inmate in the special housing unit, every prisoner was supposed to have a cellmate, according to Epstein. After his return from suicide watch, he was assigned a new cellmate, a man named Efrain Reyes. However, Reyes was transferred out of the special housing unit at 8 a.m. that morning. This was a routine procedure and had likely been planned in advance. Nevertheless, Epstein was not immediately assigned a new cellmate. As a result, one mattress on the bunk bed in his cell remained empty that day. This gave him the privacy he had wanted. However, he makes only limited use of this privacy on August 9th, as Epstein meets again with several of his attorneys that day as well. At 4 p.m., a young woman begins her shift at the MCC, a shift that will prove very important to the course of this video. Her name is Tova Noel. She has been working at the MCC for 3 years and has a 16-hour workday ahead of her. She is scheduled for not 1, but 2 8-hour shifts. This is not unusual. On the night of August 9th to 10th, only 18 prison staff members will be on duty to supervise a total of 750 inmates. In addition to Noel, 9 other colleagues will also be working overtime that night. Nevertheless, one post will not even be staffed that night. Even back then, the first Trump administration was already trying to cut government spending, including that of the Prison Oversight Agency. The result, however, is that there are far too few staff members who must also contend with an ever-increasing number of violent crimes within the prisons themselves. In some cases, cooks, paramedics, or temporary workers have to be brought in to ensure the inmates are properly supervised. It's clear from the very start of her shift that Tova Noel isn't particularly willing to do her job conscientiously. Michael Thomas and Tova Noel are actually supposed to begin a head count of the inmates at 4 p.m. The two of them also fill out the MCC head count form and sign it. The problem is, they didn't actually conduct the head count at all. The two simply signed the head count form and passed it on to the control center. There, officials are responsible for cross-checking the head count forms against the facility's inmate roster. Apparently, no one at the control center noticed that afternoon that the two had cheated. The form is stamped. On paper, this means the job has been completed by all relevant authorities. This may not directly have anything to do with what will later happen in Epstein's cell, but we can see that the prison doesn't take the rules very seriously. This becomes evident again that evening. Epstein asks a prison staff member if he can call his mother. Since his name is unknown, let's call him Rick. In theory, inmates are only allowed to make phone calls under supervision. However, Rick lets Epstein talk him into it. Apparently, Rick isn't aware that Epstein's mother has been dead for 15 years. Earlier sources even state that Rick takes Epstein into a shower stall where he can make the call in peace. Presumably, he used a cell phone. More recent reports even claim that Rick was the unit manager and allowed Epstein to use one of the MCC's landline phones.
Whichever version is correct, even though it is strictly forbidden, Rick Epstein is allowed to make an unsupervised and unofficial phone call. The call lasts about 20 minutes. For a long time, it was unknown who he had called. It is now known that Epstein called a number in Belarus, and Epstein's then-girlfriend, Karina Shuliak, is from Belarus. At 7:49 p.m., however, the unscheduled phone call ends. Epstein is escorted back to his cell by Noel and another person. Epstein will never leave his cell alive again. Another head count is also supposed to take place at 10 p.m., but as you can surely imagine, this head count doesn't happen either. Noel is in charge again, this time with another unnamed colleague. He, too, is evidently not very particular about the paperwork. The form is simply filled out again and forwarded once more. Once again, the control center waves the falsified head count form through. At 10:39 p.m. that evening, something happens that continues to spark numerous theories to this day. For a long time, it was claimed that no one had been near Epstein's cell all evening, but that's not entirely true. At 10:39 p.m., it appears that someone is walking up the stairs to Epstein's block. Some clarity doesn't emerge until February 2026, when a logbook detailing the prison's video recordings is published. At least this allows us to see how the authorities interpret the events. According to this log, at 10:39 p.m., a figure dressed in orange appears, walking up the stairs toward Epstein's wing. The camera footage is really poor.
you can only see the outline of a person in the far right corner. An internal FBI analysis later states that this person could possibly have been an inmate. Another agency, the OIG, suspects, however, that it might have been someone carrying orange laundry or bedding. In its final report, this agency refers to an unidentified prison employee.
The video quality is so poor that it's impossible to tell whether the person at the edge of the frame is wearing orange, like the inmates at the MCC, or whether the person is simply carrying orange clothing in their arms. It's impossible to identify anyone based on these images. That's why the FBI memo simply states that an orange flash of light appears to be running up the stairs to the L floor. CBS News later interviewed various prison staff members about this, asking whether it was customary for inmates to be escorted back and forth at such a late hour. The answer was a clear no. But the MCC isn't exactly known for following protocol anyway. That said, I think everyone will agree that identifying the person in the video could have been crucial for reconstructing the events. An earlier OIG memo states that the person might be prison guard Tova Noel. However, this speculation is removed from the final report. Instead, it states that at approximately 10:39 p.m., an unidentified correctional officer appeared to be walking up the stairs of the L wing and then reappeared in the camera's field of view at 10:41 p.m. The FBI and the OIG clearly disagree on who was walking toward Epstein's cell at 10:39 p.m. In 2019, the public knew absolutely nothing about this mysterious figure. Of course, investigations into Epstein's death were already underway in 2019, but even in internal reports from the authorities dating back to 2019, this person, or the orange flash of light, or whatever one might call it, is not mentioned at all. At the time, officials even explicitly stated that no one had entered Epstein's wing on the night of August 9th to 10th. Among others, then Attorney General Bill Barr himself said this: "As late as 2025, the Deputy Director of the FBI would also say in an interview that there is a video that clearly shows Epstein was the only person in there." Given the video quality, crystal clear is a bold statement to begin with. Moreover, we can now see in this video that something, or someone, was at the door to Epstein's wing at 10:39 p.m. The staircase leading to Epstein's wing was captured that night by only a single camera, which was also recording. However, the camera is positioned in such a way that the entrance to Epstein's wing is partially obscured. Nevertheless, subsequent investigations rely heavily on this video footage when reconstructing the events, simply because there is nothing else available. It cannot be ruled out, however, that someone outside the camera's field of view could have walked up the stairs and entered the floor without being clearly visible. One would think that if this mysterious figure does not come forward on their own to be identified, the prison staff should be able to help with that. On the evening of August 9th, Correctional Officer Tova Noel and a colleague named Guito Bonhomme were responsible for supervising the Special Housing Unit. Bonhomme was not actually a trained correctional officer, but rather a contract worker, and he was apparently very tired that evening. Tova Noel would later say that Bonhomme had worked a double shift and slept between 10 p.m. and midnight. Bonhomme himself would say that he had no memory of the time between 10 p.m. and midnight, and therefore could not recall whether anyone had run up the stairs to Epstein's wing at 10:39 p.m. In his later statement, however, he notes that a prison employee who had entered the wing alone would have violated the regulations. In any case, Bonhomme's shift ends at midnight. His colleague Noel remains on duty. Bonhomme is relieved by Michael Thomas. Strictly speaking, the direct supervision of prisoners is not even part of his job description, but there's a good bonus for working overtime at night. So he volunteered to take the shift from August 9th to 10th. Right when Thomas starts his shift at midnight, another head count of the prisoners is actually scheduled.
But the same procedure follows again. Noel and Thomas simply fill out the form, send it to the control center, and the control center waves it through. Strictly speaking, the two were supposed not only to count the prisoners every few hours, but also to make a patrol every 30 minutes. They don't just skip 1 or 2 patrols, they simply don't make a single one. The moment when the mysterious figure appeared on the video at 10:39 p.m. was the last recorded instance of anyone moving near Epstein's wing. Instead of making their rounds, the two are sitting at their desks. They're browsing online furniture stores and motorcycles for sale. In between, the two apparently also sleep for about 2 hours. The logs from the night of August 9th to 10th themselves would not suggest that Noel and Thomas were busy with online shopping and napping. This is because Thomas fills out and signs dozens of logs documenting half-hourly patrols. A log is also falsified for additional head counts at 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. In between, around 4 a.m., the night shift supervisor once again checks in on Thomas and Noel. Surveillance cameras show the three of them chatting briefly. At 5:30 a.m., another staff member briefly walks through the common area of the special housing unit. The video surveillance shows that no one else enters the unit, conducts head counts or rounds, or enters the wing. At 6 a.m., however, Noel and Thomas have to spring into action again. Breakfast for the inmates is delivered and gradually distributed. Around 6:30 a.m., it's the turn of the wing where Epstein is being held. It is Michael Thomas who opens the cell door alone and finds Epstein lifeless. At 6:33 a.m., the alarm is triggered. Jeffrey Epstein is alone in his cell and unresponsive. There is a noose around his neck. Another inmate claims to have heard someone shout at that time, "Breathe, Epstein, breathe." Then he says he heard an officer say, "Guys, you killed the guy." A female voice reportedly replied, "If he's dead, we'll cover it up and get an alibi." However, the inmate's statement was never confirmed. Tova Noel herself later said that it was her colleague Michael Thomas who had shouted, "Breathe, Epstein, breathe." After that, he reportedly added, "We're going to be in such trouble." After the alarm went off, Noel ran directly to the supervisor's office and told him Epstein has hanged himself. She also immediately tells the supervisor that she and Michael Thomas had not conducted the 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. rounds. In fact, it's not entirely clear how and where Epstein is said to have hanged himself in his cell. Of course, there are witness statements, but no photos or anything of the sort. Epstein is then taken to the prison's first aid room. Based on what is known, the following is assumed. Epstein apparently tied a bedsheet to the top bunk in his cell. He wrapped the other end around his neck and then threw himself forward. This is how representatives of law enforcement and the prison administration explained it to the media shortly after his death. After on-site first aid attempts, Epstein is taken to New York Downtown Hospital. There, however, he is pronounced dead immediately upon arrival at 7:36 a.m. Yet Epstein's death is not first announced by a major television network, nor by a prison spokesperson or a local politician, but by a user on the internet forum 4chan. Epstein is therefore pronounced dead on August 10th at 7:36 a.m. The news will be released to the press 80 minutes later. But something strange happens even before that. About 40 minutes after Epstein was pronounced dead, and 40 minutes before the press release goes out, reports of the banker's death are already appearing online. Specifically on the website 4chan, which is similar to Reddit, meaning it's a site with various subforums dedicated to different niche interests. Users are anonymous there and can post just about anything. 40 minutes after Epstein was pronounced dead, a user posted this. "Don't ask me how I know this, but Epstein died by hanging an hour ago. Cardiac arrest. Take a screenshot of this." Almost 30 minutes later, a user named Swamp chimes in. He posts a message claiming to have seen Epstein being taken to the prison infirmary the night before his death was announced. He also mentions the arrival of a minibus, which, according to an employee who allegedly let the vehicle in, contained a man in a green military uniform. The user concludes his post with the words, "Guys, I'm shaking right now, but I think they swapped him out." It wasn't until 10 minutes after this second mysterious post that the first news agencies actually began reporting on Jeffrey Epstein's death. To this day, investigators are still wondering how these two users could have known this so early on. But here, I have to get a little ahead of myself. The Epstein files released in 2026 will reveal that the FBI became aware of the activity on 4chan on the morning of August 10th. As late as August 2019, intensive efforts were being made to track down these two users. The first user could never be identified due to a dynamic IP address, as a federal prosecutor later explained. Even the website could only confirm that the user was said to have made 4 posts. He answered questions from other users using medical terminology in the process. For example, he explained how Epstein had been intubated and how fluids had been administered to him in an attempt to resuscitate him. Documents related to the investigation into the second user are also included in the files, along with an order to produce bank records for a man whose name matches that of an MCC employee. There are also orders to produce phone records for a user with a billing address in New York. However, the name has been redacted. It is unclear whether the bank customer or the person with the New York address is the second user. In any case, the address is more than a 5-hour drive from the prison. It is also unclear whether the two users might actually be the same person. Epstein was taken to the hospital by the New York City Fire Department. Just a few days after the posts were made, the fire department announced its intention to launch an internal investigation. However, nothing appears to have come of it to date. Instead, this chapter is perhaps one of the most curious mysteries in this case.
The autopsy is performed 1 day after Jeffrey Epstein's death. Commissioned by Epstein's attorneys, the autopsy is supervised by forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden. The autopsy lasts a total of 4 hours. In the end, pathologist Dr. Sampson concludes that Epstein died of natural causes. In her report, she rules out foul play. It states that Epstein hanged himself with a bedsheet in his cell, sustaining several fractures in his neck in the process. Epstein had a small window in his cell through which he could see the area where the guards were stationed. Theoretically, it is therefore possible that he checked to see if the coast was clear and then seized the opportunity. However, the autopsy results were not made public immediately on August 12th, but only on August 16th. Epstein's brother Mark and the medical examiner Dr. Baden are, however, not at all satisfied with this autopsy result, and they do not shy away from going public with their discontent. While the rumor mill is already in full swing, the medical examiner, acting on behalf of Epstein's surviving relatives, is further fueling the fire. For the two of them, the possibility that Epstein may have been murdered at the MCC has not yet been ruled out. Dr. Baden sharply criticizes the autopsy report. Among other things, the report includes a sketch of the cloth noose with which Epstein is said to have taken his own life. Dr. Baden, however, believes that the noose depicted in the sketch cannot possibly match the wounds on Epstein's neck. Furthermore, Baden notes that while there were indeed signs of strangulation, they were located in the center of Epstein's neck and not below the jawbone, as would be expected. In addition, Baden finds it questionable why Epstein would have tied a noose out of a bedsheet. This is because, as photos from the cell show, there were wires and cords in the room that would also have been an option.
as would the cables from a machine he was allowed to have due to his sleep apnea. However, even during his first attempt at the end of July, Epstein did indeed use a piece of fabric. And photos from his cell show that there were many sheets in his cell at the time of his death. Apparently, although his cellmate was taken out of the cell that morning, his bedding was left behind. Even if Dr. Bodden disagrees, it cannot be ruled out that he simply made another attempt in this manner. Dr. Bodden describes as particularly suspicious the fact that Epstein had several fractures in the neck region. Among other things, his hyoid bone was broken. The hyoid bone is a small, U-shaped bone located above the larynx, that is, directly in the center of the neck. According to Dr. Bodden, this type of injury is highly unusual in cases of hanging. However, it is quite common when someone is strangled, whether by a tool or by another person. Bodden's statements were quickly picked up by the media and scarcely questioned. Thus, just a few days after Jeffrey Epstein's death, the assumption arose that his death could just as easily have been the result of foul play. As mentioned, along with the online posts, the murder theory is grist to the mill for all those who have doubts about the official version. These doubts are by no means unfounded, as we will see later. Dr. Bodden also criticizes the fact that no photos were taken of the deceased in his cell. Instead, he was taken directly to the prison's first aid room. Bodden believes this made no sense. The autopsy report states that Epstein had been dead for an estimated 2 hours at the time he was found, although, incidentally, an official time of death was never established. The 2-hour estimate should be viewed less as a reliable time frame and more as an indication that Epstein was definitely already dead when he was found.
According to Dr. Bodden, security guard Michael Thomas should have noticed this. Consequently, it is incomprehensible that the cell was not immediately treated as a crime scene and that everything was not photographed and documented accordingly. The prison authorities' protocol does indeed stipulate that a location within a prison where an inmate has taken his own life must be treated with the same level of protection as any crime scene where a death has occurred. In an interview with CBS published in 2020, Dr. Bodden also emphasizes that he does not wish to form a final judgment. He could only do so once all the evidence and circumstances were available. And even Dr. Bodden did not have access to all of that at the time, because some information was still being withheld. Furthermore, the CBS article points out that Dr. Bodden has reached several controversial conclusions over the course of his career. And last but not least, he was commissioned and paid by a relative of Epstein for his statements in this case. Dr. Bodden insists, however, that his sole concern is to objectively clarify the circumstances of Jeffrey Epstein's death. The criticism of Dr. Bodden has caused such a stir that the medical examiner who led Epstein's autopsy has also spoken out. Dr. Sampson publicly reaffirms that she stands firmly behind her determination of the cause of death. Furthermore, the issue with the hyoid bone isn't quite as cut and dried as Dr. Bodden makes it sound. According to him, a fracture of the hyoid bone would suggest that someone subjected Jeffrey Epstein to this force. However, it is certainly possible for the hyoid bone to give way during hanging. It's important to remember that Epstein was 66 years old at the time of his death. The physician Sanjay Gupta, for example, notes that the hyoid bone becomes softer with age and, at the same time, less flexible. Consequently, the possibility of a hyoid bone fracture in a man of Epstein's age is entirely plausible, even in the case of hanging. It is also quite common for several of the small bones in the neck to break in this type of death, especially since Epstein's method was rather makeshift. While the entire country is now debating whether Epstein actually took his own life or not, there are two people who could certainly help answer that question. After all, the two guards, Tova Noel and Michael Thomas,
were on duty during the time Epstein died. However, amid the initial commotion, the possibility that the two might have noticed something was apparently overlooked. Even before the body was released for an autopsy, Noel and Thomas were able to go home as usual after Epstein's body was discovered on August 10th. Consequently, there are no statements available from the two people who were, in effect, supervising Epstein at the time of his death. And this despite the fact that Noel was likely the last person to see Epstein alive, and Thomas was the one who found him that morning. It wasn't until August 12th, the day after the autopsy, that the FBI sought to question the two. Their attorneys have since advised the two prison employees to remain silent, and that is exactly what they are doing. Nevertheless, both are being suspended from their jobs at the prison. The prison director is also being transferred. From here on out, we have to dive into another topic full of inconsistencies. Did Jeffrey Epstein really kill himself? Or do all the mysterious circumstances point to something else? We'll take a closer look at that in the next episode. But I'd be interested to hear what you'd say about this right now, before you have all the information. Because before I did my research, my opinion was a bit more one-sided. So feel free to let me know in the comments. That way, you're also supporting the channel at the same time. Other than that, there isn't much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever time you're watching this, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.